we might want to start, when we talk about Malaysian youth civil society organization, you might want to cast a net very wide, look at different aspects, how they appear. For example, on one way, you can look at the demographic base, whether it's ethno-religious or multi-ethnic, whether they are student bodies, wings of political parties, or larger civil society groups, or just general body. Whether it's about self-growth, leisure activities, or broader issues, especially socio-political changes. Whether they are registered, unregistered, but in person, or some group merely just appears online. So it's a very diverse landscape, and it depends on what we want to look at this. Sociologically, you can look at you as the demographic groups having its own interests. And so some people may actually fight for their particular interests. For example, what people want for their generation or for them at this particular stage in life. You can also look at people who may look for something wider than this. And the widest part probably will look at the well-being of the entire planet rather than themselves or even the human race. I think the fact that you have more focus and attention paid to your group is natural because that you constitute the future. And there's a lot of issues affecting the younger generations more than others, partly because that you're politically underrepresented. So people like to see more groups springing up. Now, in the process, how far this is transparent, accountable, and so on, perhaps depends a lot on the participant themselves. To what extent they can actually hold their group leaders accountable, to what extent they can introduce a better way than how society, the wider society, organize themselves. Our society is not known for pursuing the highest expectation in transparency and accountability, right? So in some sense, the question to ask is that are our youth groups doing better? Or do they just follow and say, well, this is how things are run, and therefore we are just following them to do the same? The perception that some NGOs or even many NGOs are working in silos perhaps come from the perception that NGOs are almost by definition single issue. So on the other hand, if you look at political parties, most political parties are meant to aggregate different issues. But this need not be the case. So to have a clearer picture, perhaps we need to think about in the spectrums of coalition building. To what extent NGOs, including youth NGOs, are reaching out to broaden their issues. So here come down to two things. That one is about focus. It's to what extent that we are striking the balance between division of labor, so that people do something that they're best in, and also at the same time having coalition building. The second part of that is that it's more ideological or doctrinal position. Do people believe in coalition building? Why? Because that if you are going into a coalition, by definition, you have to make some compromises. You can't go in and say, everyone should agree with us. You don't have anything to command that, right? So what it means, everyone compromise in exchange of wider support. That means you have to dilute your concern. You have to accept that someone else's issues are important, even though you may not care about this. But out of a strategic reason, you have to say, well, we are in solidarity. So some people would not accept that. And so that's a bigger challenge on how do we go beyond this. if you are willing to go beyond this, then there's a lot of things you can achieve in mobilizing the base so that you can speak representing a group, a number, rather than yourself. And after that, entering negotiations and making compromises. In order for your activism to be effective, you need to build alliance with others. To put it very bluntly, you may need to do horse trading. Now, horse trading is seen normally as a dirty word, right? But why should someone else working on something else passionately support your cause? Even though they are common interests, but people do have different focus. So horse trading means that you have to be empathetic to see why, and it's a matter of calculations. So there are going to be some form of compromises. But why this is necessary? Because you need the number. And why so? Because we live in a democracy. If you do not believe in a democracy, all you need is a revolution. Seize power, and then tell everyone, do what I say, right? But if you live in democracy, you need to win people over. I think it goes back to also how do we, when we reach out to build coalitions or alliance, is that alliance purely transactional, or is going to be transformational? Transformational alliance will require some new understanding, some new narrative, so that we are looking at the issues in a different way. So you need to have a bridging narrative. So when people are talking about two different issues, now you have a new narrative that can link together. It is simple language. People don't like when you try to hard sell something. But on the other hand, if you're willing to take a step back and try to look for something in common, then it's much easier for you to come together. You can work on a common project. People do not necessarily become like you, but they can see how both sides converge for a common goal. And that probably changed everyone's worldview a little bit, and see how pursuing one cause is complementary to the attainment of another cause. And I would, for people who are interested in all this, I would recommend you strongly to go online, look for a guide on transformative change making, TCM, by a German strategist called Mark Saxer, whom I have the privilege to be a friend of his. Right, I want to first of all caution that we should not overemphasize urban-rural divide. People, especially urban middle upper class, like to think that if some people disagree with us, that's because they are rural. They do not have enough information. Not perhaps forgetting the fact that Malaysia is 75 to 80% urbanized. So you do have rural area, but the numbers are very small. I think we need to look at what constitutes the difference. One is of course sociological. If you live in a rural area, that you largely retain the social structure. People are closer to each other. They probably know each other by generation, so you have a more dense social network than in urban area, where most people probably move in 1 or 2 generations, and you move places very frequently in by numbers of years or decades, right? So it's a different kind of interpersonal network. There would be different dynamics, that's first. Second, technological difference. If you live in urban area, you can probably be, you may be able to stay at home all the time and stay connected with the rest of the world. But you go to a place where you need to climb tree to get a signal, then it's a different way that you probably would treasure in-person context much more then imagine that you are part of a world citizenry. The third thing, of course, can be cultural. When we think about rural area, we need to not assuming that rural people are the same, just like urban people are very diverse. So often, when we think about the rural area, which is now pockets of it, even though on the maps, they pick up the larger part of the country. They can be culturally very different. What needs to be avoided is urban superiority complex. To think that we know better and we come here with maybe a better visions to tell you what to do. To bridge the gap, I think it's important for us to be more empathetic, to understand before we judge. To think of the other side. I think there is a danger of being very passionate for some great causes that we can be overly preachy. And when you think you have a monopoly of justice, of goodness, and that's probably where you're going to find a lot of obstacles. You're going to find yourself stopped by wars because people don't like to be told how they should live their life. But if you go with a humble heart to say, I want to learn about your problem, because your problems are part of the larger problems that I'm suffering. Let's find solutions. If you seek to understand before you judge, and that works even in urban area too, it would help you in reaching out to the rural communities. We should not be afraid of division. Democracy is premised on division. Without division, there would be no competition, there would be no effective check and balance. So it would be important for young people not to inherit the fear of many in the older generations for divisions. Many of our elders, including many in my generations, or most in my generations, crave unity. If you want unity so much, you should really migrate to North Korea. That's where everyone is alike. One country, one culture, one language, one great leader. But if we're going to live in democracy, you have to accept the fact that we're going to be different and how to live with people who are different from us. How to live with competitions and conflicts. How to make conflicts productive. These are not easy because our minds, the bigger part of our minds are probably programmed by thousands of years before we learn to adopt and adapt with modern democracy. Democracy in the modern sense survive on making divisions and conflicts productive and healthy, which is counterintuitive, but it's not impossible. I hope young people would be braver than my generations and the earlier generations in embracing differences, division, and conflicts, and to make sure they stay healthy and productive.